And now we're live. Welcome, guys, to our keynote session with Carl-Christoph Reckers, the General Manager of Uber Freight. Today, Carl-Christoph, or CCR, how we want to call him, is an ex-consultant, ex-startup founder, and now the Managing Director of Uber Freight. He's going to tell us later about how he kind of got into the freight industry. But his main topic is innovation in road freight, and especially how Uber Freight responds to the entire COVID pandemic. Carl-Christoph, the stage is yours. Tell us more about how you got into the industry, and super excited to have you here today.
Well, thanks a lot, Florian, and good evening or a deep howdy from my side. So welcome to the session. Welcome to Innovation in Road Freight. Excited to be sharing what we're up to at Uber Freight today. Also, how we think about COVID and what we're doing about it. I do want to say just briefly before we get started, there is a poll live, and if you wouldn't mind taking a second just responding to that poll, there's a second question as well. It would help me get a better sense for where everyone's at with regards to truck freight. But with that, we can do that in parallel. I'll just yeah, these are the poll questions. I'll just jump in and quickly introduce myself. So I do go by CCR. My journey into trucking, if you will. So I did indeed start as a consultant back at BCG, where I really got fascinated by supply chain and then trucking in particular. That's how I got to founding my own startup, FreightStar. It was a digital freight marketplace in the equipment transport and machinery transport space. That company I sold last year, and I think the company is now live in about 4 countries or so. So I'm quite excited about how that's going. And for me personally, now I'm at Uber Freight, and that's the capacity I'm talking to you in today. So for our agenda, I figured we just get a couple of figures to anchor ourselves on what the trucking industry actually looks like. And I've picked the US. Now, Uber Freight is a global company. So we're live in the US, in Canada, but also in Europe. And we really see ourselves as a global company. However, since I do know that a lot of this audience is actually focused on freight forwarding and ocean transport, maybe we'll just pick the US and dive in there to highlight some of the key differences as well that lead us to the choices that we make. So with that, let's talk about the US trucking industry, and it's massive. So 3.5 million CDL drivers. That actually does make it one of the largest professions in the US. Of those, 300,000 are owner-operators. In general, we're looking at about 500,000 registered motor carriers. Now, trucking is very important in the US. About 80% of the domestic cargo is transported by trucks. However, 20 to 30% of the miles driven by trucks are currently driven empty, and that's one of the things we're here to solve. Now, the demand side of the equation, so the shippers, there are about 3 million shippers using trucks to move their cargo. They're spending about $700 billion a year, and that actually makes trucking one of the largest industries in the US as well. Now, that equates to around about 400 million full truckload movements, and they're going between around about 18,000 warehouses. So those numbers are all really, really big, and that actually for us means that we're looking at a big data problem, we're looking at a discovery problem, we're looking at a matching problem, and that's where we apply technology, and that's what we're here to solve. But I do want everyone to take that away. So it is a many-to-many industry. It's not concentrated. You're talking about a long tail on either side of the equation. So on the carrier side, but also on the demand side. And that just means, so first of all, that is different to ocean freight, which tends to be a lot more concentrated, as most of you, of course, know. But that also means that for us, we have to take that into consideration in terms of how we go to market. So how do we go to market? First, let me just say what our mission is. So we simplify the movement of goods to help communities thrive. And our progress to date, so we're working with 60,000 carriers in the US alone, and that equates to hundreds of thousands of drivers. On the shipper side as well, we're working with over 5,000 shippers in North America and the EU at the moment. Now, our drivers, so drivers that are active on the Uber Freight marketplace, tend to be 30% more satisfied with their experience compared to industry average. And so far, we've collected 650,000 facility ratings. Now, again, those are big numbers, and I want to actually make that a bit more tangible. So let's spend a minute looking at how we actually go to market. Now, this is our offering for shippers, and I'll talk about carriers in a moment. So for shippers, what you see here is our web UI. So what the web UI tends to be actually most relevant for but of course we also have solid offerings for enterprise. So that is either via EDI, via API, all the way integrating into a shipper's TMS. Our core value propositions, and I'll highlight that for the web UI, but it actually is the same across the board, across the different channels we work with. Now, it's interesting. And those of you that are focused on ocean shipping, this is, I tell you, in trucking, it's not. Again, it's many to many. It also, if you think about 18,000 warehouses, that can go anywhere to anywhere. So price action traditionally one of negotiation and have the phone. So in that, we're completely taking out of the equation and streamlining. And we think there's value in that. And that is why our shippers come to us. So for SMBs, they're able to quote through the web, and again, like our API is an instant quoting API as well as the TMS integrations. Next thing to call out is real-time tracking, and this is a deal as well. So if you're working with 3.5 million truck drivers, also million of shippers and facility. Now, this is not just about where is my truck right now. This is actually about standing location and then being able to use that location for operational efficiencies, for interpreting the status of a load, for actually optimizing the backend processes that need to run. So location tracking and real-time tracking is a big deal. And again, coming back to millions of drivers, this is actually a very tricky problem, because you can't just go to a handful of carriers and integrate with them and then you're done. You actually have to meet your supply and also your demand side where they're already, like the tools they're already working with, and you actually have to integrate with a number of sources. So that's exactly what we're doing. Of course, we have our app, and our app is actually our primary source for location tracking. I'll talk more about that when we talk about carriers. Of course, we're Uber. We are the company that invented hailing a passenger car through your smartphone. So the smartphone is a key component here. But the other components, so we do ingest ELD data. So those are tracking devices already on the trucks. And there we just announced a very exciting partnership with one of the largest vendors today, with Keep Truckin', but we've also had many other partnerships live for quite a while. And then we go quite deep as well. So for our largest carriers, we go into their TMS and read out location data, read out statuses. So long story short, it's about actually using multiple sources of data, triangulating those, then interpreting those in order to realize the efficiencies that we're trying to drive. Next thing I want to highlight here are insights. The trucking industry is actually very rich in data. However, because it is so scattered and not concentrated at all, it's very inaccessible with regards to deriving insights out of that data. So we've put that front and center on how we think about our products, how we design our products. Now, this example here has just our facilities overview. So for a shipper, we provide, based on the both the in-out times, the location data, but also the carrier reviews, we provide a very clear picture and very actionable picture how their facilities are doing. And that is helpful because for shippers, if they improve their warehouse operations, essentially they will be able to save money because they have better access to trucks. But it also saves a lot of time for trucks, and it saves us a lot of operational hassle. So this is one of those areas where we actually believe data can play a key role into unlocking value and making the industry a lot more productive and efficient. Last thing on here, and I'm not going to go into detail, but it goes without saying that our platform is 24/7. Now, again, this is actually that's not something that is a given in the trucking industry, and that's made us super resilient, and also in COVID times, and we're quite excited that we can offer that to our. Let's talk about the carrier side. Our carriers are really company for any transit that different meaning, but it's really the trucking companies. Now, goes without an app, and app is front and center of our experience. Again, you can imagine that that's really where we started, and that's also the Uber heritage. So if we go a bit further, now I'm going to let you peek under the hood a little bit of how the driver experience come together, but also how do the market rates actually inform the marketplace, and that do clear line. So there's a number of building blocks, and some of those are more obvious. Of course, driver history, driver location history, but also driver preferences. They play with our direct input. That makes sense. But again, it's a big data problem. It's actually a lot to be ingested and interpreted from a data science point of view. So we do look at the supply and demand balance in individual markets. We do have just a wide array of algorithms and models that we use to actually derive like the market clearing prices, and we think is key for us to continue testing and to actually unlock, I wouldn't say a crystal ball, but actually to take the guessing out of trucking. One thing also called out on here, experimentation. So we're, I would say we're well underway, but we still have a lot that we want to do and that we want to bring to the trucking industry. So we're constantly experimenting and improving our offering, both for carriers, also for shippers. Like one of the things we just launched for carriers is that carriers can now enter into long-term contracts with Uber Freight on recurring revenue through our platform. And that is something that traditionally is done haggling over the phone as well. It is actually quite complex, but that just went live, and it's one of those product innovations where we think we can actually really drive change and innovation in the industry. I wanted to give one example here of how that actually, how the Uber magic, if you will, or Uber Freight magic manifests. And we call this one a self-healing network. And I love this. We all know that in logistics and supply chain, things go wrong. And we also all know that when things go wrong, it can get really ugly very quickly. And it actually consumes a lot of resources and money to resolve those issues. So this is the example of a carrier booking a load through our platform and then having a mechanical issue. Now, our network, and that's where the self-healing comes from. So our platform then would post that load back out to the network. And this particular example was recovered within 6 minutes. A driver then went off to pick up the load, and we were able to make on-time pickup for the shipper and deliver the right quality service without our operations team even troubleshooting. So that's personally, that's what I get really excited about, because that's those are really tough problems. But if we get those right, we can actually create a lot of value for everyone. So let's talk about COVID-19, because COVID-19 is, of course, the curveball. And I'm going to talk about the impact on the trucking industry and also our interpretation of what's going on and what's here to stay. Now, by now, you probably are all experts in COVID-19, because that's what we all spend a lot of time on. Let me just illustrate the impact on the trucking industry. And so this is a rate index published by DAT. Now you'll see the dark blue line is 2020, and you'll see the line actually go through a roller coaster. Now, rate volatility is actually common. However, just in here are unprecedented. Just the jump from so obviously Q2 was a drop down as the economy slowed down, but then the jump back up from May to July typically takes over a year for rates to move that much, and then even in just 2 months. So what are some of the forces that we think of? And obviously you probably have your own interpretation of the situation. So of course, short-term demand shifts, and this is really consumer stockpiling, so probably don't have to talk too much about that. But we do think there are also long-term demand shifts, and that can be, so of course the shift towards on-demand e-commerce, but also from restaurant to in-home cooking, from bar consumption to at-home consumption. And that, we believe, to some extent, we're also, like an anecdote, we're also living in one of our sister companies, Uber Eats, which is of course also part of Uber, is actually seeing growth, both on the demand side, of course, people ordering more food as they stay at home, but especially on the restaurant side. So more and more restaurants are going to the Uber Eats platform, which is an indicator of a trend that's here to stay. Supply chain retooling. This is probably something where the audience here is like absolutely involved in day in and day out. So what we hear from our shippers is that they're really thinking through nearshoring. They're thinking through double sourcing. They're just thinking through redundancy in the supply chain in general. And what that means for us is actually simply more truck freight or more freight moving on trucks. But it's also had other impacts. So we do see changes in spot activity, changes in tender activity, and up to the point where now, as we're entering RFP season, we have a number of our shippers that are completely rethinking their RFP strategy, how much volume they give into RFP, but also when. So a lot of changes and a lot of retooling. And then the last thing I want to call out is supply disruptions, really speaking about the carrier supply, so the truck supply. And this is something that truly keeps me up at night, because obviously it impacts our business a lot. So what's going on here? And in Q2, when rates, truck rates really were low and dropping sharply, we saw significant carrier bankruptcies, whether that was entering bankruptcy or completely going out of business. But we've also seen on the driver side, drivers actually exiting the market, and that we think it has something to do with drivers on the one hand, health concerns, On the other hand, drivers opting for the unemployment aid that comes through the stimulus packages, but also drivers just having other earnings opportunities that are closer to home, closer to where they live. For example, delivery, on-demand delivery, and e-commerce delivery. So we've seen a lot of changes there. Now, what do we do about that, and what are our answers? I will tell you, we've been very busy. I'm going to highlight a couple of things we've been doing, but this is, of course, not everything. But let's just dive into a couple of these themes. So we started a campaign which was called Thank a Trucker. Had different building blocks, not just the marketing piece, but we actually gave truckers Uber Eats credits to thank them, and we also made telehealth available for truckers, and that's something that not a lot of drivers had access to before, and all of that free of charge and on us. For those drivers that were looking for earnings opportunities closer to home, we connected them with the Uber Eats marketplace, and we do see CDL drivers signing up to become food delivery earners. We did invest very heavily into relief loads, and this is in the US. Essentially, many agencies stepped up, but also the regulator actually declared or had a very specific definition of relief in order to make sure that those loads that need to move keep moving, and we did our part. So we moved 40,000 loads. That could be anything from food, from like just face masks and so forth, but also medical equipment. We moved those completely free of charge, and we took on all the operational costs. So that was an area that we wanted to do our part to the recovery of the economy, and we did, and we continue to do. And then there's one more topic I want to talk about. So 2020 has not just been a health crisis, and it's also been a civil liberties crisis, especially in the US. And Uber made a commitment earlier this year to not just be not a racist company, but to actually be an anti-racist company. And we've defined very clear measures of what we commit to within our company. But one of those is putting our money where our mouth is, to be honest. So this campaign, if you tolerate racism, delete Uber, is exactly that. So delete Uber was a hashtag a while back when Uber was a very different company years ago. And we deliberately chose to bring that back because it really proves the point that we are willing to put our money where our mouth is and to be that anti-racist company. I have to say I'm personally very proud of what our executive leadership team has decided here and is acting on. So I think this is something that is absolutely fantastic. Now, we have about 7 minutes, and I do see there are some questions in the chat already. I just want to invite everyone to use the chat and post your questions there, and I'll try to go through them one by one. So let me start with Gerard here. So does Uber Freight has entered the drayage space? What are the main challenges that you see in the drayage space? So the short answer is no. We're not in drayage today, but we do. I will say we continuously look at the trucking industry as a whole, and we do think that a lot of the innovation that we bring to the table actually is applicable to other parts of trucking as well, and drayage being one of them. But again, we're not live today. And there are probably other people that are more equipped to speak to the challenges of the drayage space. I will say that from my perspective, the space is a lot more concentrated, and as a result of that, there are probably solutions already in place, and also technology that's rolled out that can actually work with a much smaller concentrated supplier base, also facilities. I think in the US there are only 9 ports that process more than 1 million TEUs. So you can actually offer different solutions. And I will just leave it at that, because again, it's like we're not in the dredge business, so I'm probably not in the best position to comment on that. But again, we're growing our business dramatically, and we're making strides in the trucking industry, and dredge is obviously something that that we're constantly looking at. Then from Nick here, a question: in what area of road freight is innovation most needed? Where is road freight most outdated? So there's a great question, and if you think about, you can segment and cut the trucking industry through multiple lenses. So if you start by trailer, typical split is like van, reefer, flatbed, and then everything else. So if you look by length of haul, for example, short haul, long haul, and anything in between, so those are common cuts. But then you can also look at the actual value creation process. So from the the booking, or even before that, shipper contract, to booking of a truck and getting truck in and operations and so forth. So I will say, in terms of equipment, we're actually looking at everything, and we do operate in van, reefer, and flatbed. We also have our own trailer pool, which has been like a tremendous success as well. I will say across long haul and short haul, there's probably a lot more of the discovery that needs to happen on the, because you're essentially not working with a lot of learning. The just the OD pairs, origin destination pairs, are across the, so it's actually much locked up density by also in terms of data. So that's why I think there's actually a lot more gained and moved. Now I will say, for us, we've put a lot of focus on the operational pieces, and that's where a lot of value can happen. So I talked earlier about how we go to market with shippers. We think that the pricing and just the pricing data piece is something that has not been solved in the trucking industry, and we're aiming to solve that, and we're investing a lot of data science resource. So if you ask me on that, this is a clear opportunity, but also operationally, it's at the beginning of our journey of making trucking more efficient, and automation and using smart algorithms to interpret data and to improve relations by that. So it's I think there's opportunity everywhere. So this is a broad answer, but I will even include, which I didn't mention earlier, but happens back office, that too is a big area. I'll move on a little bit, because we do have just a couple minutes here. So from Gulnari, how is Uber Freight different from other competitors? Is it one of the winners of COVID with its digital approach? So yeah, it's a two-part question. So how is Uber Freight different? Let me start with that. Look, we are a digital company from day one, right? Uber Freight, but also Uber, was started with the premise of bringing technology to an outdated industry, whether it was the taxi industry with Uber, or restaurant delivery with Uber Eats, or trucking with Uber Freight. So that is the premise that we actually started the business on, and that I would say gives us a leg up to anyone already playing in the industry. Now, I think there's tremendous competitors and really fantastic companies in the industry. So like I'm not gonna belittle any one of our competitors. I think, again, formidable competitors. But let me just talk about the second piece of the question here. So is it one of the winners of COVID? Yes, I think so, very clearly. So we were able to move our office, our entire staff, to work from home in a heartbeat. We made the decision at the end of a working day, and the next morning everyone worked from home. So that, I think that's like very hard to come by, and not a lot of companies were able to make that switch that quickly. Plus, the other thing I will say is, like, I mentioned APIs before, but I also just mentioned the 24/7 aspect of our network. That is really what shippers need at the moment. And that's also what carriers need at the moment. There's basically all the planning that typically happens through a year has just been completely thrown overboard. So shipper planning, that is. So if you think about that, you need a partner that can actually react very quickly, and we can do that because we have our platform and our network. We're at time, but let me try to answer Lasse's question here. What are the primary differences Uber Freight is facing in Europe compared to the US market? Yeah, so I think there's actually a big difference in terms of regulation. And that certainly is one of the things where we had to adapt our product. So, for example, in the US with Motor Carrier Modernization Act, carriers and brokers are very strictly delineated. Whereas in Europe, I can only speak for my experience in Germany, where it's the Spediteur concept. The lines between your own assets versus hired assets can actually be a lot more blurred than they are in the US. So we've had to adapt a lot there. I would be with regards to data feeding into demand balancing is also in a different state. So the US is actually, I would, from my perspective, further ahead. Has played a role for a period of time. So that's what we're working with. Now, but I will say one thing that is actually similar, and I know you didn't ask for this. So some of our customers are actually global customers, whether it's beverages companies, and they clearly expect solutions, and they expect us to help them across. So that's one of the things we've actually, that's helped us find a footing in other geographies. Just working with our customers when they were ready to adopt in new, we were there. So that when we went into Canada, that's happened when in Europe, and that'll continue to happen. So I hope that answers or addresses the question to some extent. I didn't see any other questions. Feel free to go ahead, Florian. I think, Florian, we are at time as well. So
we have enough time
if you want to go ahead, then absolutely.
If you don't have any question, I'm sure that CCR will be available for your follow-up questions. We will make the session available as an on-demand webinar afterwards. We'll publish it on YouTube most likely, and share it with the you as the attendees anyways. So yeah, just let us know if you have questions. Thanks a lot, CCR, for taking the time and educating us on the Uber Freight journey and your journey into the industry. Was super interesting. And now for all of you, there's another session coming up. We've got Yuko Kamae, the VP of Product at Flexport, another exciting company in the industry. Her session just started like 2 minutes ago, so feel free to join her as well. And yeah, have a great day, CCR.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for participating, and thanks for the questions.